documents. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, recording's good. So in the room, we have Chris, Tom, Bill, Cheryl, and myself from the planning board. I think that's all the planning board are here. So we do have a quorum. That's good. From the advisory committee, Nancy, Marie, Chuck, Doug, Doug, right, Doug, and
Yes.
Janice, yeah, Janice.
And
spring is also in the, okay. And then on Zoom, we have Mark Craig's joining us. That's interesting. Hi, Greg. And Nan and Pat. Okay. So we're good. We have fun. Everything's ready to go. So good to go. Public comment period for people. I have not on the agenda. There's nobody here. So I think we're good on that one. Unless Craig has something that's not on the agenda he wants to say. I think so. Okay. Okay. So there are some things. So I sent out a new version that Nan did of all the stuff we talked about so far with the changes. And there was a couple of yellow highlights in there. Nan, do you want to share the screen for that? Or?
Yep.
There's a few yellow highlights that we wanted to revisit. One of them was in large retail, which has a square footage. We left our square footage thing blank because we were trying to decide we wanted to, we would allow something the size of, say, Clark's or a pharmacy or those kind of things, but we didn't want like Walmart supercenters kind of things was the idea. I talked to Ray earlier today, and he was going to come up with a number to recommend to put in there. And I think that's the only thing we need to do here, right, Nan, is just
correct. Yep. Yep.
Ray is planning on joining. He should be coming on Zoom.
Okay.
But I think Ray he was going to just look up what that square footage should be, and then we'll stick that in.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll go on to the next one, which was, this one I wasn't quite sure what you were talking about. It's
I think it was because there was a note I had in my a message I had in my notes that to add a definition for lot of record, and so it hadn't been reviewed by the committee yet. I think that was it.
So this was a new definition that you added.
I think so.
Okay.
I think that's why I highlighted it.
All right. Now you're making me go sleep.
This is the
That's so hard to read.
yes.
Want me to make it bigger?
Yes.
Is that better?
Be careful. So what do people think about that? I thought it was reasonable for me, but that's not always the. Seems straightforward. Okay. Yep. All right, so I think that's good.
Okay. This one was highlighted from when we first started, and I don't know if I missed it or and we talked about it and I missed it, or if we didn't talk about it. But so you have a manufactured home community that's 5 or more home units, which is what you had. I was just so what happens if you have a parcel of land that has four? What do you do with them? How do you treat that? I mean, I was concerned with five because it leaves a kind of a no man's land in between one and five.
Well, if it's fewer than five, wouldn't you treat it like if somebody was trying to put multiple single family homes on a lot?
Y- yeah, I mean, yes, but I guess do you allow more than one single family home on a lot?
You do.
But
How many do you allow? Or does it depend on the lot size?
Depends on the district too, I would think.
So, yeah, I mean, most places don't allow more than, maybe I was thinking that because most places only allow one primary residence per parcel. So I guess if you allow more, and someone's got enough room to put four on and meet all of the other requirements, maybe that's fine. That's up to you. I just was flagged it because it's a little unusual.
Can we imagine, a situation where there's a main house on a lot and somebody wants to move four mobile homes onto the lot? And they'll have to be very close to each other because the lot is, tight. Can we imagine getting into trouble with that? How is the septic gonna happen?
Well, yeah, and that's true. Some of these things would be limited by the fact that most of the town is well and septic, so you're gonna be limited in what you can do by health department regulations, right?
But we can't, so where it's allowed in the, where would this be permitted? Where you would have it.
Well, let's look at the use table real quickly.
This comes up a lot with single family homes on like a bigger lot, where we see this quite a bit, where we're gonna put multiple single family homes on a lot, but they have to be subdividable.
Right.
It's like a big criteria.
So it's allowed in the RR, RA with a special use permit and MC.
We haven't seen it with mobile homes, but we have seen it with regular single family.
So it's pretty much there's a single owner of the property, but the individual buildings are owned by different people
Owned or rented. Owned or rented, yeah.
or rented. Okay.
I guess what's the lower limit of is three mobile homes on a lot, is that a mobile home community?
Doesn't sound like, because
I thought doesn't the manufactured housing definitions, and aren't we looking at making that so that those are treated like single family homes? So in other words,
Yes.
if you put three manufactured homes on a lot, the lot, it's doable, but the lot would have to be subdivided. They don't have to subdivide it, but the lot has to be subdividable, meaning that means you're going to have to meet some requirements in order to have like things like road frontage and setbacks and all those kind of things. The lots need to be able to, the three single family homes need to be able to be made into standalone on their own property kind of.
Right.
That's the way we do. I probably did manufactured housing like if you're going to put a single manufactured home on a lot, it's treated the same as a single family home.
but most mobile home parks are not going to be easily subdividable that way.
That's why this
This is separate. Okay.
Yeah, I was just concerned about if there was, I mean, clearly we would treat an individual manufactured home like a single family home where in any case. Clearly, this has five or more of them would need to meet the manufactured home community rules. And I was just making sure that it was clear what happens to someone that has 2, 3, or 4 manufactured homes on one parcel. What is that? And I don't know if that needs to be addressed or what.
Yeah,
Is that
this is Pat. Maybe we should change the 5 to 2,
Oh,
and then we won't have that gray area that Nan is bringing up. If you got 2 or more, it seems like you got a community. Certainly not a single home.
Well, but we have a lot of cases, but we've done a number of site plan reviews where people are putting a second single family home on a given lot. That's not that unusual.
we did something.
Recently, we did one with us, it was a third, yep.
Bounced to zone for me, so I
Yep.
did that.
Yep.
I mean, I think
So I think, I don't think the number's 2, but maybe the number's not 5, is it more like 4 or more? Because I could see 2 or 3 is fairly common for us to look at for single, and these might be modulars that they're putting up on a foundation, these might be
What kicks in when they become the community,
all the rules that apply to a community.
which are what?
We'll have to look at that later.
so.
It's a subdivision, isn't it? It's but I don't see that, if there were 4 of these modular homes somewhere. That's not a community, that's just 4 homes. But if they don't own land and one entity owns the land under them, it's not just 4 homes, side by side, it's a different proposition, it's not a condominium, it's a subdivision. It's the way Cornell sells things. So,
So let me just interject that and we can look it up, but if you have someplace else in the zoning that says multiple dwellings are allowed on a lot, provided that they're situated in a way to create legal subdividable lots, and that it meets all of the other dimensions and requirements, then I think leaving it at 5 is fine, because then we've given direction how how you would deal with that.
Well, let's leave it at 5 for now, and right, because I think we're gonna end up, part of this further on, we review is the rules around, because we're looking at housing, right, is manufactured home community on our list of things to look at later?
Yes.
We'll be actually looking at the rules for this later. Right now, we're just defining it. We'll be looking at the rules related to this.
It comes up in density, which is where
Right.
or that is in the density
Right.
stuff.
And
Okay.
community generally can be much more dense than if you're just putting 2 or 3 or 4 of these on a single property. They're gonna be much less dense because of the being able to subdivide it in all that. Than a mobile home community, we know what mobile home communities are like, right? They're packed in pretty tight. Yeah, all right, so let's
Okay.
and we'll come back to it.
Okay. Let's see what else there was in the definitions.
I didn't see much else, I don't think.
I think there were some in the use table is where the rest of them might have been.
Yeah, so Nan, this is Pat. I'm sorry, my video is not working.
Oh, yeah, I
Um,
got your email just before we
Yeah.
started.
Okay, so data center definition looks like cottage got attached to the
Oh,
end
yeah, I
of
fixed
it.
that. Yeah, I fixed
Oh,
that.
okay, perfect. That was what I was gonna ask.
So Pat sent an email out with several items that are defined but not included in the use table yet, so we can discuss those.
Yeah, there's about a dozen or so.
All right, I'd like to know,
But
when was the email sent?
and
Well,
10
of,
5:52, just right
Yeah.
before the meeting started.
sorry, I didn't get materials until today and I was busy until right before the meeting.
Yeah, well, because I don't want to, really tonight, I thought we'd just spend a minute or two on this, on these revisits, but because I really wanted to, I think the conservation subdivision discussion is going to be much longer. So I wanted to get onto that, but what do we have here? Is there anything?
Well, some of these I don't necessarily think needs to be on the use table. But the list that Pat gave us is accessory data center, agrivoltaic, co-housing, group home, junk, loading berth, portable on-demand storage, recreational facility, amusement, recreational space, signs, tiny home, townhouse, and workforce housing.
Well, it's really covered.
We do.
And then I think we should, if there's anything to cover, we should save it.
Yeah,
after we have-
I think so. I agree with it.
So you want to come back and revisit these?
The use table, yeah, I think we should come
Okay,
back.
well, what I can do in the meantime is I can add a row in so that it's got space for you to make your decisions on what you want to do.
And I think we had decided that, there are things that are going to have definitions that aren't necessarily in the use table.
Right,
Yes,
right.
of course. But
Yeah, like I don't
Tom,
think a loading
townhouse.
berth needs to be it's not a separate use. It's part of something else.
Right?
Yeah. So
Um,
some of them may not be applicable, but
yeah.
others I think are. You're missing tiny
Right.
home. Where is that?
Right.
So-
Yeah, so let's come back to that. Pat sent out some comments on that. We'll come back to that. So that'll be on the agenda for next meeting.
Okay, I will do that.
Yep, and you could, if you can, if there's things that people think are missing from the use table, can comment on that.
There were a couple things from that we had before, like we had added campground, but you didn't make any decisions about how you wanted to do the review process and where.
Okay, yeah, let's come back to this use table stuff at the next meeting.
Okay, all right. So all of these. So just to clue everybody in, it's campground, co-housing that we didn't decide on.
Yep.
We
So-
did have townhouse in here, Pat. It's under dwelling, townhouse.
Oh, I missed that. It was a very quick review. Great, thank
Yeah.
you.
So, and part of this is because we had some email issues. Not everybody got the materials I sent out. Some people didn't get it until today.
Yeah.
Some people got them when I sent them out, some people didn't. So we're working on figuring out what happened there, but so one of the sort of homework assignments for next round is to look at the yellow highlight things in the use table. And we'll go through those.
Yeah. I think some of these are in here, Pat, but I'll cross check them and make a row for the ones that are missing and that should be on the use table.
Thank you, Nan.
So that
Appreciate it.
it's ready for your decision making next time.
Sounds good. Okay.
Okay. Let me find conservation subdivision in here.
And do the bulk table.
Oh, did you want to do? Okay, hold on. Let me get there. Sorry.
There was
My senior,
the senior housing one. I think one person answered. Does anybody?
it is in there as special use for senior care facility in neighborhood residential. We put it SUP. And that's what I was wondering. I was questioning whether that was.
Right.
We can talk about that another time. I went home and thought, I thought we went to.
Right, because 10, and you may be right. I mean, a 10-person senior facility in a neighborhood residential may not be the right.
No, it was nice. It was not permitted. It seems like opening that door. It probably wouldn't happen, but it's just it's something. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. We could go there.
Yeah, so we'll address all these use table things at the next meeting, and maybe we can run through them pretty quickly.
Oh, it's a true.
Yeah. Hope Springs attorney, yes, I like that. So conservation subdivisions, so.
Okay, yeah, I just gotta find, where
Conser-
that, were you
subdivisions,
gonna do anything? Oh, then there was also, I had highlighted in a couple things on the dimensions table too.
right, right, So-
Um,
we'll cover those things, because a lot of people didn't see that until today, so
okay,
we'll cover those. That'll be, so we already know a good chunk of the agenda for, that's the other thing I wanted to do tonight was have the agenda set for next time. And I was gonna put conservation subdivisions off another meeting, but with the discussions going on around some projects that might be happening in the town, I thought it was worthwhile to move conservation subdivisions up. Because, I think it's a timely topic, I guess, was the way to put it.
oh, I'm just trying to, find where, because I think the bulk of this was in the subdivision law.
Correct, and there was a separate document that we distributed that you kind of rewrote the whole.
I did. So do you want to go through, I mean, what I did, where you see conservation subdivision in the zoning is basically making sure it's authorized and making sure that it's consistent so that there's no other rule that prevents you from doing a conservation subdivision. So you'll see we've added in the definitions for primary and secondary conservation areas, which are kind of the heart of identifying the open space to be preserved.
One second, Chuck had some questions related to primary, secondary, right, Chuck?
Okay,
Well, the main question was, did they appear in the definitions? And I didn't see them, and you're saying they are there now?
Yes,
So my bad, let's go on.
okay. You were
okay.
questioning whether there were.
It was a,
To have it alphabetized as a primary, because no one's gonna look under
yeah,
conservation.
Right, it should be conservation,
Yeah.
primary
Yeah.
conservation.
No one's gonna.
Yeah, okay.
So you want a conservation area, comma, primary.
Right, well, just because then the conservation area things end up together, right? Yeah,
Yeah, you just wouldn't think to look under people.
I think that's a good idea. And again, when we come back to the use table, well, no, it's not on the use table, but when we're talking about the subdivision law, right now, the conservation subdivision law, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it says it's required in a conservation zone and allowed in a couple of other zones. I think one of the things we want to do in this case is we want conservation subdivisions to be allowed pretty much in any zone.
Okay, I'm just trying, so I'm trying to decide. So like I said, the zoning authorizes conservation subdivision, but there's no section about conservation subdivision in the zoning. That's all of the details are in the subdivision law.
Right.
I mean, so there's a couple different ways that communities do it. Sometimes the whole thing is just as a section by itself in the zoning law. Sometimes it's like any kind of dimensional and use kind of rules are in the zoning, and the process to do a conservation subdivision is in the subdivision law. So one of the decisions you have to make is, where's the best place to house this? Do we put the whole thing in zoning? Do we split it up like it's kind of now it's split up? Or how do you want to do that? And I'm just going to pull up the subdivision law while you're thinking about that.
Subdivisions be subdivision law or so.
there must be other instances where our laws cross-reference each other.
There are.
So, I don't see the problem in having it stand alone as under subdivision where it's currently and referred to in the zoning law. As long as the definitions are consistent in the zoning law with what we actually do in the subdivision law.
Yeah,
So why don't we just go through, so say that again.
In other words, he's saying keep it kind of like it is now, that it's the subdivision law is separate, and one of the things in the subdivision law is conservation subdivisions, is what
Right.
I'm saying, right?
Right. So let's just quickly go through so I can show you where conservation subdivision is mentioned. It's, for instance, I added in here, here's a section that was added on flag lots. And so I added in that, this is people find ways to get around the open space requirement in conservation subdivisions. So I added in that a flag lot, the open space on a flag lot, is the buildable portion of the lot. So the way they're laid out, they don't normally count towards the open space. Unless there's some, unless it's a big lot and there's some environmental feature that you want to preserve on it, I suppose. It was mentioned that there's this is talking about frontage and access, and in this is an except that in the conservation subdivision, setbacks, road frontages, and all those other dimensions are flexible. They're not a set type of thing like you see in your normal dimensions table. So I added in, exceptions to things that would confine the ability to do a good conservation subdivision.
Right.
So a lot of those are, yes, here's a reference, Article 9 of the Dryden subdivision law shall be, so here's what we have currently. We have for major subdivisions in RR, RA, and CV, I recommended that they be required, but you have decisions that you have to make about whether you want to require them, whether you want to just make them voluntary, or whether you want to make them, the other option is voluntary with density bonuses to incentivize their use. The reason I added in as my recommendation was as required is because we have about 25 years of history of communities trying to make conservation subdivisions voluntary, and it rarely happens. You just don't, no one is going to go through that unless they're required to do it. It's much easier to do just a conventional subdivision and divide the land up into however many lots you get.
Yeah.
So if you're serious, my recommendation is if you're serious about using this technique, that it should be required at least in those areas where it most counts. But we can certainly make it, it could be done anywhere, but mandatory in certain locations.
I think they can be, I agree with you. I think they can be done in any area that allows residential subdivisions, allows residential properties. Like, you're not going to put a conservation subdivision in a light industrial zone, right?
Right.
But in the other areas that allow them, I think they may be used, but should, in my opinion, they should be required in at least RA and CV. Which is, the RA is rural agricultural, right? And CV is conservation.
Right.
So I'm of the opinion that we should require conservation subdivisions in rural agricultural and rural and conservation.
But not RR then.
I don't know. That's the question I have. What do people think about RR? Chris?
We have a couple of comments. One, I think it should be required, just because if we have any major subdivision based on the comp plan and the residential guidelines that we currently have, like, there's a lot of good examples in there. And I think some of the way that things have been done, especially with the flag lots, need to be looked at. Because the way the flag lots have been done they're not in line with what the residential guidelines have been, or recommendations in there. So I don't know if we want to follow the residential guidelines or change them or require them.
But we will be looking at, you talk about the design guidelines?
Well, like the flag lots, for instance, we've seen some plans where they're very messy and
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense. Like it goes against the whole idea of the conservation subdivision in rights or the preservation of land currently. So,
So you're saying they should be required in what zones?
I think all three.
Three, RA and CV, others?
Because that helps to protect potential.
What's the housing committee think?
Just curious, what farmers?
Well, I think farmers,
Well, here's a farmer.
It's just tie, I'm just curious, I don't have an opinion so much, but sometimes these things really tie their hands in a way that is likely the most
well, I
controversial.
mean, I'm talking about major subdivisions, minor subdivisions are still, are not required to be conservation subdivisions, so it's a major subdivisions here.
Okay.
And my feeling is, correct me if I'm wrong, that as part of a way to help protect ag lands, conservation subdivisions may be a sort of a tool for that, is to prevent ag lands from just being chopped up into just regular plain old major subdivisions.
Right. And remember that conservation subdivision is what we call density neutral. You don't lose any density. Whatever that lot is eligible for in the zoning district, you get it, whether you have a conventional subdivision or a conservation subdivision. It's really a siting technique. It's where those building lots are, where the homes are, where the driveways are. And it's carefully done to preserve 50% of the parcel. And if it's a farmed parcel, then the landowner can get full development, his eligibility for full development and maintain farming on some of the lot.
Right. That was one of the tools we were looking at, would be an agricultural subdivision dealing with the prime soils, similar to the conservation subdivision, where you're dealing with, say, wetlands or.
Right. Right. Well, the way I've written it is I've included prime farmland soils right into what primary and secondary conservation areas should be. So it's kind of already in there.
So that's great, it doesn't tie the farmer's hand from maximizing whatever they're trying to do. It just creates a different model.
And so for something, a large piece of land, which will have some areas that you can't develop anyway for swamps or whatever, that doesn't get included in what could have been developed. Right, so they're going to be looking at what of that parcel could have been subdivided, which of course swamps would not be included in that. They figure out how many parcels, how many structures you could put in, and so that has to be pressed. Okay.
Right. And one of the techniques in a conservation subdivision, and we'll talk about a little bit, is the cluster type idea where you have 100 acres. Let's say you can put 10 houses on it instead of breaking up into 10 acre lots. The houses are clustered on much smaller lots and the rest is left. So you're still putting 10 houses on the 100 acres, but it's all driven by, because what we haven't gotten to yet, and it comes from in a separate discussion, is we're talking about doing density. Right, later on, Nan, later on, we're going to be talking more about.
Yeah, I think that was for not in this phase.
Right.
But yes, I mean, at some point you need to review the amount of development your law allows and whether it needs to be less or needs to be more, or maybe it's okay. But yeah, that's a discussion to still have.
And I got a hold of the town of Southold, which is a town that has tremendous pressures on things and is trying to maintain its agricultural base. So they were doing this kind of thing. In addition, for the clustered housing, they require that 20% of that housing be low income.
Right. Yes, that's certainly an option to consider. That's called inclusionary zoning because you're being inclusive instead of excluding people. But that's a whole nother discussion to have related to housing. So let me go back though. What do you think? Because originally, you had allowed clustering in the RR zone. So I guess if I added in this sentence that says conservation subdivisions are allowed in any district where residential development is allowed or is permitted.
Right.
But then it's mandatory in just the RA and the CV, or do you want to add the RR district into it?
Like you had, it would be mandatory in RA, and CV.
All three.
I would agree with that.
I would almost say it's mandatory, maybe the idea of separating it as its own piece. It's a little more sense as opposed to just a sub-clause of subdivision. If we're making it mandatory.
It's the standalone section.
Yeah, because.
Yeah, well, but the thing that I wanted to establish is that the subdivision, you really can't regulate sizes and dimensions in subdivision. You do that in the zoning law. So I tried to establish all the dimensional and use kind of requirements in the zoning law, and then a separate section that tells you how to do a conservation subdivision, which is a process. And that's in the subdivision law, which is a process kind of law, mostly process, not always, but so that's why I have them kind of separated.
But I was thinking as we talked about it, being all separate. It really is if you're saying you can. Mandatory in this
Right.
district, and you really want.
So, I don't think we certainly don't want to require it in neighborhood residential and our zones. But there are, what I'm hearing the most is that they think it should be all three. Mandatory conservation subdivisions or major subdivisions should be mandatory in RR, RA, and CV.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So let's look for other places where it's mentioned. That's where we are.
So how that work goes now, if it is mandatory. So they're
What?
gonna- it wants to have a large subdivision. At what point, who decides where those clusters are?
That's whoever designs the subdivision.
Yeah, that's we're gonna cover that. There's a very specific set of steps that the conservation subdivision process includes, which you've had a relatively good section on conservation subdivision already. It's been in your zoning, but it was missing some of the process on how to do a good conservation subdivision. So that will be coming up. So when we get to the other section, we'll go over that.
Right. So this is what we're saying. What we're saying by making it mandatory is that if somebody wants to do a major subdivision in one of those three zones, they have to follow the conservation subdivision process. Right. So, and then
Yes.
we'll find that.
So the next place in the zoning that it comes up was I just added, so here you have this is what you've always had on how you calculate density. It tells you how many lots you're eligible for. And I just added to remind everyone that this yield it's calculated whether it's a regular subdivision or a conservation subdivision, so that we're not creating another rule for calculating density.
If you can divide it into 10 lots, if you can put 10 dwellings on it in a regular subdivision, you can put 10 dwellings on it. And
Correct.
So it's different.
Or
Where or manufacturing. But it's what's different is how it's really about siting, how the homes are sited, how it's broken up, all that stuff.
Right. Let's see. Yeah, so this is the same thing. Basically saying that we're not changing the rules for how density is calculated. referring it to subdivision law. And this is things like you have had a rule that says no yard provided for any structure shall be considered a yard for any other structure. But in a conservation subdivision, you might have common open space that the way it's laid out, it might be part of another lot. So I just wanted to make sure that we weren't doing anything to impede the application of a conservation subdivision.
Right. Makes sense.
So this one, I think we're in the are we in Varna here? I lost track of where we are.
Where is Varna?
Let's see, concept plan. Oh, this is for plan unit developments. So this one I think is you have to decide if this is what you want. So a plan unit development is a housing development, or it could be commercial, but it's a development that is pretty much like designed as its own zoning district. So you create the uses and the rules for that, tailored to the unique circumstances of that particular parcel. And so I thought, and you may disagree, which is fine, but I thought that if you have a plan unit development that is a major subdivision, meaning it's got 5 or more lots in the RR, RA, and CV districts, it also should be a conservation subdivision. But that, you might want to not have that restriction so that the PUD, really the PUD is just a negotiation between the town and the applicant. So we don't really know how it will come out. So I think this is up for discussion about whether you want to tie conservation subdivision to PUDs. I worry a little bit about when a community relies on plan unit developments to accommodate projects, then it's kind of like, I don't want to call it spot zoning because it's legally not spot zoning, but it's a kind of akin to that. So you're making rules for that parcel as you go along with some guidelines from this section here. But if you have a lot of PUDs, are you ever going to get a conservation subdivision? That was my thought.
What I just heard is or required to use the conservation. What is a PUD again?
Planned unit development.
What is that? So it's and there's all that land on the back hill. Okay, so and if someone wants to develop that is necessarily going to be a PUD.
So they could request a PUD. One that we're working on right now, or that we've been working on, is over on Hanshaw Road, behind the old Ludgate property.
Okay.
There's a PUD looked at going in there. Like another example might be like the tiny home, the cottages thing they did in Cleveland could be a PUD. So basically, what you're doing is you're taking a big lot and you're making rules just for it. It's like you said, it's a negotiation between the town and the developer to figure out how this thing should be developed. And it can be outside, because it's a PUD, it's outside of most zoning, right? I mean, they adhere to building codes and all that stuff, but
Right. It's because like in Freeville, it was because the houses are so small.
Right. Well,
and in that place there was city or village services.
And there's also like the one on Hanshaw Road, same kind of thing. It has municipal water and sewer, and they wanted to cluster the houses And he puts it in big greens, bigger green space, and they're small houses, right? They're, I don't, are they tiny homes? Is that what they're doing? I don't think they were tiny homes.
Mansions.
But the idea is what a PUD allows you to do is negotiate and do things that you wouldn't, like, for example,
Sounds
if
lovely.
you want to put multiple single family dwellings on a property, the property under our current zoning in a certain area, the property has to be subdivided.
I mean, it's completely different from conservation of this would do, except that you have a freer hand to do a better job.
Yeah.
If you were in a conservation district, your hand would be tied in terms of, density. You might have
Right.
greater density with the PUD than you would
Right.
at the top of the conservation.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
To me, on a conservation.
Yeah.
I think it's.
But it sounds great, but sometimes it's, the more PUDs you do, the less you follow your zoning.
Yeah.
So there is a balance there, because remember, every time you give someone new rules, you're not following the rules that were set for that district. So there is a downside to it.
I think tying it here is advantageous because then they can't use PUDs to get around the conservation subdivision requirements.
But they also are going to maybe create this housing, which seems to be a priority too.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be sounds like a double-edged sword.
If the conservation districts are encouraging clustered properties, then maybe it's really just about making sure our dimensions are correct as far as when we get to that next meeting.
Right.
To ensure that we allow for the tightness of clustering that we want.
Just remember that in a PUD, generally the density requirements are one of the things that's negotiated.
Right.
Which is fine. Again, with towns can, right? They can essentially, it's a way to get outside the zone. Right, but the people that make decisions on the PUD, the site plan reviews for the PUD, are the town, and they should be adhering to things that are reflective of the comprehensive plan, and
And it's subject to a public hearing.
and it's subject to public hearings. Exactly right.
So
All those kind of things.
listen to the public hearing. I don't see the need for the conservation subdivision requirement.
A PUD is a PUD, right?
I'm not worried about huge numbers of PUDs. But among other things, it's probably most likely going to happen where you have municipal facilities which are becoming ever more restricted.
Nan's really warning us on this, so Nan, more you could add as to what you've seen?
Well, I'll be really honest with you. I have I have a personal bias against plan unit developments because I've seen so many abuses of it, and I've seen, like you go up to the kind of the poster child for what goes wrong is, I don't want to point fingers, but the town of Ballston pretty much let anything come in as a PUD. And they were just totally overrun with these huge housing developments that weren't anywhere consistent with the zoning or with their comprehensive plan. And then they were like, oh, we got to stop this. And they had to go through all sorts of contortions to bring it back. And it was, so I worry about it. And it goes both ways because the PUD has to be approved. And sometimes there's good ideas that because a community, I don't think we want that, they go away. But more often than not, I feel that there's more danger in not upholding the values and the goals that the community is trying to get by having land use regulations, because it's an open book. It's what, the developer comes in and says, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z. And if the town likes it, they can say, sure, go ahead. So it's kind of like, yes, it's a technique. It allows flexibility. It allows, it could allow some creative design, but and I don't know how you've used it in Dryden, but there is a risk that the town board will, because it's usually a two-step process. I'd have to go back. So it's the town board approve, because it's basically you're creating a new zone for that district, a PUD district. It's its own thing. And so, if the town board thinks it's a good thing, but everyone else has to follow the rules of the zoning. So I have a bias against it, and I don't want to, I think a lot of people think it's great and it gives you a lot of flexibility. I personally think that the conservation subdivision, which gets rid of lot sizes, gets rid of road frontages, gets rid of setbacks, and they're set at the time of the subdivision, is equally flexible.
My question is, that if it's, the PUD has to adhere to conservation subdivision. Everybody loves the idea, but then can they come to zoning and say, but we only have a 40% offset? And can we give them a variance? Is there a end run around?
Because the conservation subdivision section lays out the percentage, but it's a dimension, so anyone could go to the ZBA and seek an area variance on that.
Well, I'm wondering, so there could be for someone, a way for them, if it was a project everyone liked and it was a conservation subdivision, for them, if they couldn't quite meet the rules, they could come and get a variance.
For an area variance.
So there is a, for that.
Yes. So, I mean, it sounds like you've had some success with PUDs and you like them. And so my fears may be not relevant to Dryden.
I personally like this, leaving these two sections in there.
I like to think that in our town, the planning board and the town board is not going to be able to approve a PUD easily that is upsetting to the members of the town. I think we are informed, active, and vocal. And the idea that we're going to be overrun by PUDs in this town.
But I don't know if this takes away much in the terms of flexibility, but.
Yeah, especially if it's part of the conservation subdivision. And the PUD has to follow those laws. But they can't follow all of them in order to realize their project. They still have an ability to come to zoning and get variances for anything, and they can still say, we really can only, whatever. Okay, so they're not completely tough. By down to your judgment. Yeah, I just, who knows what the wings, politics will be 10 years from now. We have trust right now in our planning and but.
I second that and third that.
What she has written. Okay, I think we leave that there.
Okay. So those are all of the locations in the zoning law that kind of authorize how where you're going to do it and what, whether it's mandatory or voluntary. So do you want to go over the bulk of it in the separate section? Let me just save this.
Was that separate document?
Yeah, I'm gonna put it up. It's in the draft subdivision law, and then I had sent it as a separate item.
Right. And just to be clear, most of the zoning she did as a red line, right? So we're looking at the current zoning, we're doing a red line. The conservation subdivision is just, she completely rewrote it. So the document that went out was just a complete rewrite of the conservation subdivision. So that's what we're doing. It replaces Article 9 of the subdivision law.
Is that section up on your end?
Yep. And I did get some, I did get some emails about this. Right, Chuck, you had some questions on the subdivision piece that came out of housing. I know Marcus sent some stuff out, right? You want to talk about any of that?
Yeah, we go through it. So a section.
That's good, I guess, and you would bring up those things as we get to them, or how do you want to go through what you sent?
Either we go through it sequentially or I can just pop along. Sequentially is my preference.
Okay. All right, so the first part's the purpose.
Yep, so this just is lining out 7 items of why we're asking people to do this, and it's, kind of I tried to pull things from your comprehensive plan that were hooked into using conservation, such as conserving open lands and unique natural areas, giving people greater design flexibility, in diversity of lot sizes and housing to get at some of the housing goals, to connect to the comprehensive plan, to protect agricultural areas, and to create a subdivision where the people who are moving into that subdivision benefit from having that open space so that there's direct visual or physical access to open space that to create neighborhood identity that's consistent with Dryden and to get at the town's goals for maintaining rural character. So those are the philosophical kind of foundations of why you do a conservation subdivision that fit. Again, I think it fits in perfectly with what many of the vision and goals you stated in your comprehensive plan are.
And one change from the current law is that this is mostly for Evan. The one change here is that we aren't just looking at conservation, we're also looking at things like ag land and soils, right? So it's the same process, but it's incorporating those things into the process.
Right.
So for number 1, I just would wonder why mentioned much further in the document, protecting endangered plants and animals, and that might not, that would be part of this purpose, perhaps, as well as just in the number 1 here.
Sure.
Yeah, just I looked for it was buried number 8, like in the document, but it seems like that's an important
part of the process we look at it is it's one of the things we look at, but we don't define it here in business. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And, you might want to use the word fund, which is a real definition in terms of the purpose as well, which is not.
What was that? I didn't hear what you said.
Other part is I know that farmland has a real definition, and it's something that is constantly mentioned in value, right? To somehow put that as part of the purpose too.
And
Okay.
there's statewide words, there is a specific map showing where those parcels are, where that line description is.
So if we add significant habitats and prime farmlands to this number 1, does that get at it?
Prime farmlands and
Soils of state.
soils of statewide importance.
And I still have a little trouble hearing you. Say that again.
Soils of statewide
Oh, okay.
importance. And that is on we just never state map of where those soils are.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. Yes, absolutely. Yes, those are good catches. Those absolutely should be in there.
So that's the idea. Instead of having a separate ag subdivision law, comprehensive subdivision kind of incorporates both. All right, anything else on the purpose? Okay.
Applicability, this kind of repeats what we just decided, that it's shall apply to all major subdivisions in RR, RA, and CV. And I think we should add the same sentence that we did before, is that
Yeah, hold on one second. Chuck, you had sent some comments about items 6 and 7 in that purpose.
I did, but I'm okay with it.
You okay with it?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Never mind. Sorry, go ahead, man. Sorry. I just was reading something that Chuck had sent. Go ahead.
Doug? Do you have a definition of major subdivision?
Major subdivision is 5 or more lots.
It's not acreage,
It's not acreage,
5 or more lots.
it's lots.
So if someone wanted to build 4 mansions on a large parcel, that would not be covered.
Correct. It would be considered minor subdivision.
Want to put acreage. Now in, cell phone.
The problem with putting acreage on there is if you have, let's say you have a farm diagram that's 200 acres. And the farmer wants to break off 3 5-acre lots. Are we going to stop them from doing that?
Well, each lot would be, but,
Yeah, I mean, subdivision is never defined by the acreage because you can have 5 quarter-acre lots that you're splitting off. And it's still a major subdivision.
This is density, because in a zone, you're not going to be able to go beyond a certain density. So
Right, density dictates how many lots you get.
right, what's to stop him from taking that 200 acres and dividing it into 4 50-acre lots?
Well, generally what we do when we have density is the density is calculated from the parcel, the current parcel at the time the law was passed. So whatever so if you have a 100-acre parcel that at the time that the law is passed and it sits there and it's still 100 acres, that when it's subdivided and you're in just for the math purposes, let's say you're in a 5-acre zone, then that 100 acres gets 20 lots. You can use those 20 lots in one subdivision that you do all of them at the same time, or you can do them incrementally over time and assign unused density to the undivided portions of the parcel. But once you hit the 20, you've used all the density for that lot.
You can't go further. Well, and that's the other thing with major subdivisions, and we've run into this. That we just did one that was considered a major subdivision, but he was only breaking off. He was splitting one lot into 2. The reason it was a major subdivision was because that lot that he was subdividing had already, the original lot had already been subdivided 4 times, 4 lots, and this became the 5th lot.
Right.
We've done much,
Exactly.
and it became a major subdivision, even though he was just trying to subdivide off one lot.
in terms of trying to protect farmland, I really think you do need to go by acreage. You need to have a mechanism to protect acreage in large chunks. Because trying to protect 10-acre pieces doesn't work for farms.
So I think, Nancy, that's what this conservation subdivision made.
If it's required, this one looks, out here, it seems to say it's.
It is required.
And this is the same thing this is the same section we just went over in the zoning law. It's just a repeat of it.
Reading that, it's.
Yeah, I think that's the whole idea is to create open space and.
Oh, yeah, you said it'll be
Design it.
required. Because I mean, at some point I saw you putting something in and it shall be possibly or something. I was like.
No, I think that's the whole point of this is to stop is to create.
Okay, and I get confused on some of this language, but yeah, my point, is you have brain cells, you need to have 2 brain cells. And you can
This is achieving what you want to achieve. Is that
you will be a job and say.
The other thing is we need to be a little careful about how we do some of this, because I know people who own large swaths of ag land don't really want to tell them what they can do with it either. So there's this balance that we have to think about. Exactly. Now, this to, to the point that was made earlier, this piece that we're doing right now, if they're going to divide it, if it becomes a major subdivision by whatever definition, right? It's a primary lot that's being divided 5 times, or it's a lot that's already been divided a couple of times and now is becoming a major subdivision. This is only going to apply there. If somebody has a primary lot that has never been subdivided, and they want to put, like I said before, if they want to put 4 50-acre lots on it, that's not a major subdivision. That's not going to be its requirement.
Right. And then what some communities do is, in recognizing that that is a likely scenario, they incentivize it by saying, we'll give you, if you do a conservation subdivision, we'll give you more future density. But, some people aren't interested, if they have like 4 kids and they want to split their land up 4 ways, they're not interested in the extra density.
Right. They're not. And
It does retain the rural.
it does retain
the character of one house on 50 acres, and that would be hard to prevent.
Right. And that does go, so they still go through the minor subdivision requirement, which still requires site plans and all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't come to a planning, minor subdivision don't come to us, right? So it's
a great thing.
It's a right. The planning department handles those.
And to what extent can variances come in? It sounds like there's variances, like you really can ask for a variance on almost anything.
Yep.
And
yes.
Yep. You can.
And in order to get it, there has to be a good reason. You have to really build the case for why you're letting it fall.
And that's, again, another nice thing about the conservation subdivision is that there's really, it's designed for the parcel, and there's, unless, I suppose you could go and get an area variance on the percent open space, but in terms of road frontages and setbacks and things like that, you don't have to, you wouldn't have that situation with a conservation subdivision, because you're allowing it to be flexible. Although I might have had, that's one of the things we have to, I did leave it flexible. Okay, let's continue. So this next one here is really just saying that when you do a conservation subdivision, all of the major subdivision rules of the subdivision law still apply. We're not changing the public hearing and, the notifications and all of those things and the timeframes. Those still meet, and still a hold for a conservation subdivision.
Right, and as a reminder to people, I think most people here know because we went through this on the other one, but major subdivisions, they come in for a preliminary review, gets approved or not, right? There's discussion goes back and forth if it's approved or not. And then there are 2 public hearings that need to happen for both the primary plat and the final plat. So there's at least 3, right? It's at least 3 months. And sometimes it's usually 4, because oftentimes with these, the person doing them will come in and do like an introduction. Like what happened with the Trillium Wood one is that they came in, they did an introduction. What do you think? Right? They got some feedback, but they hadn't actually done an application. And if they want to continue, they have to put in an application. And when this application comes in, then there's a site plan review. And so there's multiple steps that are defined here.
Right, but those steps are prescribed by the law.
By the subdivision.
And so the public hearing really goes to naught unless somebody's trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes, right? Well, I mean, they have the public hearing, but the public can come and say they don't like what's happening. But the law allows them to do it, so there's no stopping.
No, we don't, there's nothing that says we have to approve of it.
Oh, really? Even if it's following all the rules?
There's nothing,
Well, it could follow all of the rules, and depending on the unique circumstances of that, it might have, it might be, you know, environmental impacts that can't be mitigated, for instance, or there might be some reason why you say no. The board always has the ability to say yes, no, or yes with conditions.
right?
Okay.
So, yeah, so it's, I mean, a major subdivision is, I mean, it's not, it is something that needs approval. It's not something that somebody just get, I mean, if they could just meet certain criteria and it was guaranteed, then what do we need a planning board site plan review for?
To make sure we're doing
Yeah.
sense.
But Tony, I'd like to then go to minor subdivisions, and the last line in that first paragraph under applicability, this article may be utilized for minor subdivisions.
Right.
And you know, if somebody had 100 acres and divided it into 4 lots, they would not be conservation subdivision rules and all of our trying to get tidy and neat here wouldn't apply. They would be a minor subdivision if they're not
Right.
right. So this kind of goes back to what Nancy was saying about acreage versus the number of lots. And I just wonder if we shouldn't make minor subdivisions if we're going to leave it non-obligatory, non-mandatory, that there are bonuses or something in there that gives us some power short of regulation. Because right now,
Well, I know, like, I think I understand what you're saying. Because I know that the town of Scotticoke, which is in Rensselaer County on the other side of Albany, they set their applicability for conservation subdivision as any 3. So it's applied to anything that's a three lot splits on a parcel that's over 20 acres in size.
okay, so it's both. There, in other words, it's acres in
Right. Right. So I think that was a situation that recognizes what you were talking about, is that, you know, if you do a 4 lot split of 100 acres, you've kind of lost the opportunity to have that open space.
Right.
Except yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that if they were only going to build one house on, you know, 25 acres, there's still going to be a lot of open space left, but it's not going to have the kind of protections that a conservation subdivision has. So you can do that. I mean, you can say 5 lots or more, or you can say on minor subdivisions on lots of a certain size.
Chris,
Shouldn't we just, instead of a major or minor, shouldn't we look at, what kind of cover these points, just subdivisions in general?
well, I think the intent of having the minor subdivisions is so that if somebody just has 10 acres and they want to divide it in half, or 3 acres and wants to divide it in half, is there's that the planning department can just do that. They don't have to go through this whole long hearing process, public hearings and all those kind of things.
There's many hoops to jump through.
Right.
Major subdivision. Subdivisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what she was talking about. Yeah, what she was talking about, I think is reasonable. I think it kind of gets to that idea of splitting 100 acres into 4 50-acre lots or 2. Right. Yeah, it might be a problem. Yeah. So I think something along the lines of, I think we still need that minor subdivision definition, because we don't really want to force, a lot of these things are pretty routine, and we don't really want to force people through these long, drawn out regulatory processes if we don't have to. And
And also, if you're a farmer who's had this 100 acres in your family. For
Yeah.
100 years or hundreds of years, and you want to put forth, like you said, somebody with kids.
Yeah.
There's a point which there's too much regulation.
There
There's
is.
still a lot of open space left, and it's still creating rural character, and then probably we're gonna build the house on a wetland. I don't think there's a danger of too much regulation and.
And they still need a review, because they're coming to the planning board for a review, so if they were gonna build a house in the middle of a swamp, that would, I think.
And for a lot of people who have these big lots of land, and there is a general feeling like, don't tell me what to do.
Right.
Be careful how much.
Yeah, so I think having the major and minor subdivision is reasonable. But I like the idea of, if we're talking about some of these large lot things, that maybe we put them in for requirements.
Especially if you're trying to talk about protecting ag. I mean, it's one thing to say rural character. And you can have a farm on 12 acres, you can have greenhouses and things like that, but animal agriculture, generally you need more than that. And if you're actually doing major cropping, so anything where you use any equipment, the smaller lots are harder to do, they're less efficient. You use a whole lot, every time you make a turn, you've used like twice as much energy just getting the tractor to make the turn. So, I think that particularly for the soils of statewide importance areas, that it's not just that you still have green space. It's that you really need to retain some very large plots.
So you're trying to incentivize this or require? it? Like if I have 100 acres, like if I decide to follow the rules of a conservation district, I could put these 4 houses in a little, right? I mean, I have that option and I'm saving all that other space. I have a lot of flexibility. You're talking about saying incentivizing or requiring, is it very different?
I think dimensions have a lot to do with this too, in the applicability of section D. I know we're not covering the dimensions, but they're related to this. Because it says in section D, will follow the requirements of density. But I think we're gonna want to look at that, because depending on where it is in the town, like if it's land closer to Ithaca, that should have consideration for no density. Especially along the developmental nodes that are listed in the comp plan, but like for a housing standpoint, like where it's specified for density zones, it should be kind of referenced somewhere. And we might want to look at the density specific of what's in there now, but to kind of fit that housing need in the right areas, but not.
Nan, you had an example from Rensselaer County, right? Where they put an acreage thing.
Yeah, what this other town, they said all major subdivisions are required. And they also said all subdivisions of 3 lots or more on parcels that are greater than 20 acres in size are also required to do a conservation subdivision.
Yeah, why don't we try putting something like that in, and then we'll, and we'll see how, because remember, all this is when we get through all this, this is all going to be distributed, and then I think that sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
You say it's gonna be the conservation subdivision now, I mean, it's still, that large lot still has X number of divisions it could ultimately have. You haven't actually taken
Right.
anything away from it. That's very important.
Right, that's super, super important that we are not taking any density away by doing this technique.
You just make sure that as the density develops on the land, it develops in a clustered, denser
Right.
fashion. And
Right.
change the agricultural use as long as possible.
Okay. I'll beat that one.
Okay, so the dimensions, I mean, this is really basically saying that the planning board will allow alteration of all of the lot dimensions, except for a couple things. 50% of the parcel has to be as open space land that we've defined. And then we do add a minimum street frontage per lot, because that's really what you need for a driveway.
Right.
And then the minimum lot size, is not given a number, but it's given, it's really based on what they are going to need for getting well in a septic system in. So it partially depends on the location. Some locations might have better perk than others. So it's really, the lot size is the least important feature in a conservation subdivision.
Does minimum lot size tie in, or let me ask this a different. So I'm thinking about a conservation subdivision we did with North Creek subdivision. And they defined building envelopes, and one of the things they did in defining the building envelope is they avoided like there's setbacks from creeks and those kind of things, avoiding wetlands. So minimum lot size could vary because you need space for the building, you need space for the well and septic. And if the lot contains, like, if it borders a creek, or if it has some wetlands on it, or those kind of things, right? Isn't that also, won't that also drive, or is that handled some other way?
Well, it depends. It could drive it, but the way the way a conservation subdivision is, we have to start thinking about it that it's an environmentally, including farmland, oriented design process. So you don't start with the lots. You basically, step one, in that we have that in here. When we get through all of this, it does go through the step one. So the first thing on the list of to-dos is to identify the features on the parcel that need to be preserved. Those are the stream setbacks, wetlands, steep slopes, prime farmland soils. All of those get identified first as the first step. The second step is then you actually locate the house sites. You locate where the building envelope of, not the building footprint, but the building area for each house is going to go.
It's really a disturbance area, right? Like where they could, because that's going to include the space needed to like dig a septic system.
Yes. So you identify the buildable portions outside the open space areas that are where you want the houses, to give them the optimal location for access, visual or physical, to the open space. Then the next step is you put in trails or connect them. I suppose you could do sidewalks too, if it was that kind of neighborhood, and the streets and driveways in a way that is the most efficient you can to limit the number of, road infrastructure you have to build. The last step, and the least important step, is then you draw in the lot lines. So, some of the open space, like let's go back to your example about the stream riparian area. A lot could be drawn in that has that portion of the open space in their lot, but they would not be able to subdivide or build on that portion because it would be deed restricted, that portion of the property. So the way I think that's not a problem. There's an infinite number of ways that conservation subdivisions can be drawn. The open space is sometimes its own lot, like if it's a farmer who wants to keep a field and it's all one lot and they maintain ownership of that. Sometimes it's put on one or more estate lots, so a couple people get to buy really big parcels. And sometimes it's split up among many of the homeowners or the lot owners in that subdivision. So you have a continuous open space, but the lot lines, each person gets a piece of the preserved open space. So I don't think what you were describing is an obstacle.
Okay, good.
Tony?
Yeah.
I wonder if in light of what Dan just said, it would be helpful to take the definition for open space lands, which appears on page 7, and moving it forward to item 1 in this list of the following shall be met within the conservation subdivision. I think it would help any reader of the final document to see that definition immediately rather than later.
Are you talking about the definition in the zoning law?
Yes.
And you want that moved where?
I misspoke now. I meant the definition on page 7 of your document that we're working with tonight. It says open space land shall be designated as separate
Oh, right. Okay.
open space lot as one or more individual conservation lots owned in common, etc. So I'm suggesting just moving that up into the first on your list.
Yeah, so you want to move that up into where the dimensions are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Instead of going line by line through this, can we just go through where people have comments? Because I'm concerned that it's already 7:30 and we're barely gotten off the first page. I thought we were going to move in that direction for review.
Well, this is a complete rewrite, so it's, I mean, yeah, I don't want to go through it line by line, but her describing what she's been describing, I think is important. Jumping through it, but so there's. Does the housing committee have any other pieces of it?
I don't have too many other comments.
I personally would rather hear people's comments than going through the document line by line. Everyone was sent the material, so.
Right. There are a couple of people that didn't see it. I mean, some people had it for a while. Chuck's had it for, there's several people have had this for a while, but if there are two, yeah. Yeah. So, where were we? I just want to jump. So we jumped through the steps, right? Which I think there were no comments on the steps, right? Everybody agrees those are the steps. Okay. What was the other section? Did we skip a section?
Well, we talked, yeah, we missed some process stuff. So basically this, when you do a conservation subdivision, you do have to have a lot of information about what's on the parcel. So the sketch plan has a list of items that should be included on the sketch plan. And then there's this section that's the site analysis. And this is basically goes through and tells you what should be included in the open spaces and how to tell, you know, how to decide what those are. So it's a list of things that should be identified on the parcel so you can begin to identify your open spaces in your buildable area. And there's quite a few of them.
All right. Does anybody have any comments on these pieces? Because it's defining all the things we've been talking about. It's defining wetlands. It's defining riparian buffers. It's defining prime agricultural soils. All those things, and saying historic structures, right?
And so, here's your habitats in here: rare vegetation, significant or rare habitats, etc.
This is where now. Here's the thing: UNAs currently they're defined, but there's they don't really have any legal protections, right? But this does say UNAs would fall in these areas of rare vegetation and all that kind of stuff. So it's really saying the UNAs need to be defined in here.
What it really means is the UNAs mean is that if they come to have the plan done and it includes a UNA, the work of defining the habitats has been done. And they don't have to worry about it.
That's right.
They just have to go. We have materials they can reference.
So this is covering that. This is saying,
yes.
I don't think we need to specifically reference UNAs because you could have an area that has some rare vegetation that hasn't been identified as.
And I don't think you should reference UNAs because of the ways they report. But yeah. I'm looking at
Yeah.
I'm looking at this and thinking there's for some, you were talking about the people who just wanna do something, I mean, if we say, not even minor ones are gonna be in this conservation district. I mean, maybe some way to let people know, not in the law, but somehow let people know that perhaps Conservation Board would be happy to help them come up with the stuff they need to make it easier on them. I'm all for making it easier on them.
Well, and here we're just defining that they have to identify all these areas, and the Conservation Board certainly could be a resource to help identify it.
I think we.
So we have that the applicant may obtain advice and assistance from an accredited land trust or environmental organization. We could put in the Conservation Committee,
We're a board, Conservation Board.
Board, yeah.
Conservation Board.
Is there,
Do you want to put in the Dryden Conservation? Is it the Dryden or is it the county?
It's town, town.
Town of Dryden Conservation Board.
I should probably make sure the rest of my board would proceed about it.
Well, we're just listing them as a possible resource.
Yeah.
It's not something they have to come to you. But
Yeah, it says May. The May.
We earlier said that for any time there was a site plan review, we agreed we would come and have an extra meeting to do that. We don't even have to wait for a regular meeting. We were willing to come and have an extra meeting to advance that.
is there recourse for, I guess on the enforcement side, so say the plan says the building envelope should be here, and they put it the building not there. I don't, this is a general question, like if they don't, it's find out here that they,
one of the things
we don't follow that.
get to enforcement, and so here's the thing. Once something is in the deed, once a conservation subdivision has been created, there's really not much we can do as a planning board. We're not enforcing.
Right.
That should be caught. Thinking of the example you're thinking of. It should be caught during inspection. So is there any, I guess here's the question. Is there anything in this that defines what inspectors should be looking at when they inspect a property and determine whether to move it forward, other than just straight building code, right? So in other words, in that scenario, had the inspector caught the fact that the staked out place for the foundation was not in the building code, that's where that should be caught, really.
And that's true for everything.
That's true. For
Yeah, that's true for everything. I mean, they had what the inspector should be looking at is the approved subdivision plat that has exactly where everything is going to go.
Yeah.
So, man, can we put anything on zoning that gives a little more teeth? Because I know this has been a comment that's come up over time, is like, there's nothing in there that has kind of the teeth to give the enforcement more of a power. So I don't
Okay.
know, one piece or if that's a code
I
piece.
think that what I understand is that there are code enforcement officers who don't think it's their role to enforce zoning. But we now have a zoning officer. Right? And so I think that's a question. I don't think it's something we're gonna solve tonight.
Yeah, no, this is a general,
But I think it is something we need to keep in mind is that
we need that
Ideally,
language in there.
we want to make sure that whatever we put in here, so in other words, if part of the process is, they have to, because if they have building lots, they have to stake out the foundation and have an inspector come and verify that things are in the right place.
Right. I mean, we certainly can add something, and it is confusing between building inspectors and code enforcement officers, but that's an issue. The zoning should articulate whether the enforcement officer of the zoning law and the subdivision law, because it's connected, it's usually identified as the zoning officer. And then what the town does is it assigns one of your inspectors or one or more, as the zoning enforcement officer. So you might have a building inspector that just does building inspectors, and you might have a building inspector that also is the zoning enforcement officer.
But I think we need to, we definitely have, it needs to be the zoning, whoever's assigned to enforce it, we need to just make sure that they know that they're supposed to enforce it, and that's more of
It's a town board oversight of
that's a
code
town-
enforcement. I think it's
that's-
really, it's.
that's really bad.
Yeah, just, it needs to be spelled out. So.
Yeah, it could be, but it won't make a difference if that's not coming from.
But is there anything here that lays out like when inspections are required? I would think,
No, because it follows, it would have to be in the regular subdivision law. There might be something in the regular subdivision law that talks about inspections, but we'd have to look that up. I don't know offhand.
so we
Not
should-
in the subdivision, not in the conservation subdivision section.
Just say enforcement is a black hole, but
yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we need to do in looking at this is we need to define from a zoning perspective. There's guidelines in the building codes about when inspections are required. I think there needs to be guidelines here as well. So, for example, they stake out the foundation and they stake out where the septic system's going, and they stake out where all the ground disturbance is going to go. It should be inspected, it's verified that they are within the places that they're supposed to be. That they meet setbacks, that they meet all of those things, right? Because that's where that has to be caught. You can't wait till the building is built to find out that pole was put in the wrong place.
Yeah, it's gonna get.
which is up for that.
Yeah,
When that happens, because that happens,
it does.
that happens. But
And
I
it's- so
just
it's-
think it's
it's,
enforcement really. The rule in this town is as long as your neighbors don't
so
come.
you're saying, Dan, that type of thing, when inspections are required, is in the main zoning law, wouldn't be here.
Correct.
So we'll have to look at that, okay. Other comments? Chuck, you had something?
Under site analysis, if we drop down to number 9, I was wondering, because of what happened when we looked at the town lands and the required buffer zones by EC and the Corps, if it's not just wetlands, but wetlands and the legal buffer zones.
Yes, you're right.
Okay, and then I might suggest adding a 14th, an additional point based on some things that follow that would identify known archaeological or culturally unique sites or items.
Yeah, well, yeah, because we have to do that for a seeker. That's one of the questions that comes up in seeker.
Or it could be integrated into 7, which is historic structures, or. No, I think what you're saying, is
Yeah, archaeological.
yeah, it's separate.
Yeah,
It'd be
I think
14
it's-
then.
Okay,
I think that's a good idea. Like I said, if we do a seeker, that's one of the
It's one of the
questions.
questions that, yeah.
Is it impacting archaeological or? What else?
Part of the design for these subdivisions, do we need to insert any of our residential guidelines in there, or? I don't know if they were referenced in there, because some of them have some good images, and I don't know,
Right.
so that's the way we want these to be kind of developed. or-
Yeah, we should definitely, right, that is certainly a starting point. And I'm just gonna make a note to add that in rather than take the time to find the exact spot to put it right now.
I mean, that could be something
Um,
too, as part of zoning review, is looking at those guidelines, do they still meet the?
Well, it's not in the space, but the design guidelines are something that we, and I think one of Dan's recommendations was that we incorporate. Instead of having the design guidelines as a separate thing, is that we incorporate the design guidelines into the zone, but
yes.
not in the space, but it's.
Yeah, but that's a really, the point well taken. I think that this is definitely the place to reference those.
Okay. Other comments? Yes.
Under D, dimensional standards, the major subdivision must preserve at least 50% of the parcel's acreage as open space land. In the parcel that's 50% wetlands and 50% farmland, what happens?
I couldn't hear what you said.
If the parcel that is 50% wetlands and unbuildable and 50% prime farmland, what does the developer do?
Oh, well,
Oh, yeah.
so, what's required is 50%. They can certainly do more, if they want to cluster something even tighter. I don't think these things are meant to, again, the 50% is to do that, find that balance that we're trying to reach between allowing development and protecting things. Um, you could make it 50% or, to encompass the regulated, all of the regulated, um, resources. Certainly the wetlands that are regulated, has a different, they're different than prime farmland soils, which don't have the same regulatory connotation that goes along with them. So, you know, so I guess the developer would have to first, if you go back to the rules and you look at primary conservation, elements are the things that are regulated and absolutely can't be built on. Like you're not going to build in a wetland, you're not going to build on a 30% slope, in those things. And then the secondary, conservation areas include those other unique features of the parcel, like prime farmland soils, cultural, things, views, and they're going to have to balance out what is included in the 50%. Or you have to add something else in here that says we want at least 50% of the parcel, but more if there's more, if all of the features on the site are more than 50%. I mean, you could have a parcel that 100% of it is prime farmland, and what are you going to do then? You have to allow some development on it.
Which
I
means,
think it makes sense to be, you're saying you're trying to conserve something, you're gonna conserve 50%. It should be you're conserving 50% of the buildable area, actually. The other deal that the part that's protected wetlands, nothing's happening for that anyway. We don't need to worry about trying to protect that at all. I go back to kind of Southwold too, that's
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of partly addressing what you said, is that it's 50% of the parcel's buildable acreage. And then that way, what you're doing is the things that aren't buildable are going to be preserved anyway. And then there's 50% more. That could potentially end up to be a lot of the parcel.
I mean, I understand that some of the things that, as the conservation, some of the things we'd like to be conserved would still be considered buildable land, and I'm fine with that.
so for example, the UN, if we think about certain properties, where if the UNA is a wood. That's
Well, like the woods, David Trillium Woods area.
That is
So-
buildable.
That Trillium Woods is totally buildable. So I'm happy to see that in that, and the prime soils are buildable. So I'm happy to see the woods combined with soils, and then trust that when the planning board is getting together and working on the plat, that you recognize that the woods get protected too. And so 50% is buildable, but when you're approving something, you don't let there be a house in the woods.
So in that scenario, if you think about that particular one, the wetlands would not be included in that 50%.
Correct.
But all the other places.
It's 80%.
You have to keep 50% of it as available, so it's.
Right. 80 acres of arable and was it 12 acres of 30 acres?
Because again, you can't say
30
somebody
acres.
has a lot that's 100% prime soil. You really tell them they can't subdivide.
No, you're gonna build on some of it. The whole idea is then you're dense things, you're protecting as much as you can in a manner which still allows it to be used for agriculture.
Yeah.
And the ag will just have to give up some for the woods.
I think that
So you wanna add in buildable here.
Right. Because you're right, a swamp is not buildable.
So that's.
That should count for the green space. It's not really green space, well, it is green space, and you can.
It is, and it's not just the actual soil, but it's also the, that's what the 15 feet or whatever it is, but.
So,
Yes.
Well, I was just saying, you know, 25-foot views down the swamp and then on stairs.
Well, not EC protected, not
But it's not too specific. It's protected and that environment. Which is, it does. That's the challenge.
But in the scenario originally mapped out, 50% wetlands, DEC, so that's discarded at this 100 acres. You have 50 acres left of farmland. Now you only can develop on 25 acres.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, we just protect the half of the farm. Yeah. Yep.
Well, half of the whole wetland and half. Right, exactly.
Well, we can really protect the wetlands.
So what if somebody takes unbuildable land and decides to make a humongous parking lot?
Humongous what?
Parking lot, yeah, it's protected.
Again, it's all, and
Yeah,
that's,
well, if it's, say the slope is too steep for buildable land, well, it could have some other use. This is too specific, is my question.
I always wonder about these people who say slope is too steep for buildable, having seen the towns in Switzerland. There's no such thing as too steep.
well, it's about all.
This defined buildable, and that's my question.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't even need to be in.
Well, I think our code tried to come up with things saying that steepness with too steep for buildable, but it depends who's building and how. You need to build in a very different way on real steep land.
Well, I mean, define what buildable and.
Buildable is going to be, I think that is not otherwise protected.
I think that the general measurement is 15% slope.
Is that, do we have that defined somewhere?
Yes, it's defined in the zoning, and it was defined up in here where we were looking at what needed to be, let's see, right here, areas where the slope exceeds 15%. You can change that if you want to 20%, but you know, I think there are some people that would say you could figure out how to build on 15% slope. On a 20% slope, I don't think you'd ever get a septic system in without engineering it.
It would be a fancy engineered septic system. I think it's okay to leave it in there now. We may have to come back and look at that definition, but yeah, it's, you know. Chuck, right. Yeah. I know.
You can go for variance on it.
Yes, it's a dimension that always, any dimension can get an area variance.
Chuck had a comment.
Going back to site analysis, the last sentence in that paragraph, the site analysis is not intended to be a highly engineered or exact document, but a general sketch and description illustrating the location and type of environmental features that are present on the site, including. And then we have 13 items. And I'm wondering if this is asking too much. I'm thinking about the comprehensive plan, and we've obviously have a lot of important language in the comprehensive plan for conservation and community character, which is emblematic of our town. But we also have a lot of housing language, which has been introduced into the most recent comprehensive plan. I think it might be the the major innovation and expansion of the plan. And if I were a developer, I'd look at these 14 things and say, this is really discouraging. I'm not going to build in Dryden. And I just wonder.
But not every parcel is going to have all of these things.
Okay.
You know, it's like a lot of these things, you know, like I don't even think you have any critical environmental areas in town right now. You know, there might not be any farmland on that particular parcel. There might not be any wetlands. So I think that what this is it's an analysis for the developer to key in to understand the parcel. That's what the conservation subdivision asks people to do, is to really understand the environment of that parcel more than a conventional subdivision does. So you know, I wouldn't look at this as discouraging. I mean, I think that it's
Part of this you could go.
it's understanding it's inventorying what's on the parcel in order to identify the open space lands. That's what it's trying to do.
And I do think when I look through it, a lot of this is public, in the public domain. You could go online and find out a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
An aerial view of the property, and I don't think, it doesn't seem that onerous when you actually. I mean, it's onerous in that there's 14, but each one is probably not that hard to figure out.
So the Woodruff Shock developers, they're good at this.
Oh, yeah.
They've seen it before.
Yeah, I don't think it's. But if we look at the words from the potential purchaser of the Ed Hill property, they had no idea that there were unique natural areas there. They just had no clue. So this is good then. Yeah.
Why is that what for? Which I think is, even if we weren't doing conservation subdivision, I think they need to know what's on that property in order to know how to divide it up.
Oh,
Yes. Yes.
Especially if we're thinking about wetlands. Now, this is incorporating some other things in there that, like, kind of normal subdivision would do, like soils. But, you know, DEC protected wetland, still gonna have some of those on, right? So there's
Well, and they knew to look for that. I mean, that was easy, but you know, pretty much any developer.
Yeah,
You go to the city.
But see, again, this, what this does is this defines.
Right, other aspects of.
And we also, if you look at the site plan review process. For a site plan review for anything that we're doing, it's a pretty long list of things they have to. They have.
like you said,
It looks like a pretty long list. Now, many of the things they don't have to do because they don't apply, but there's, when you look at the list of things that are required for site plan, that's pretty normal. I don't see this as overly onerous.
Seeker, like you said.
Seeker,
This
same thing, yeah.
seeker road is a longer short form, and it's going to ask all these questions. They have to have the answers.
They have to have the answers to them.
But they still have to do it.
It's a pretty long list,
Yeah.
but it's things that it's all things that they kind of need to do. I mean,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
any other comments? It is after 8:00. How much is there anything else that people brought up? So I'd like to suggest. Anne has a bunch of notes about this that she can take and incorporate into this, and then we'll distribute it again. But that next time, so for the next meeting, the agenda, and I'll try to make sure that people get it ahead of time. And everybody gets them. But you already should have all of the things that we need, because so the red line, the new red line document that was just sent out. On the next one, we're gonna start with the area, we're gonna revisit the use table. We're gonna start with the next, it's 270. It's the use bulk and area table, it's next, right?
Yes.
And then 6 months, right? So the next, on the agenda for the next meeting will be those next couple of sections. So we're gonna revisit that. We'll redistribute this. And if there are other comments that come up, because I know Housing Committee's been discussing, Ag Committee may want to discuss this conservation subdivision more, right? If there are more things that you want to, feedback you want to give, certainly do that, right? But then we'll go on and try to catch as much as the rest of the stuff as possible in the next one. Okay. Where's my agenda? Is that everybody okay with that? Yes. Feeling pretty good about the subdivision? All right, and I think I just set the agenda for 9 minutes approval from February 5th. I sent those out, they're pretty straightforward. So we'll read them. So, you move to approve, second, favor. Okay, we approve the minutes. Next planning board meeting is March 26th. And then the next zoning advisory is on April 9th. No. That can't be right.
March. No.
Can't be the 9th.
Spring.
April 7th. Or so no, 9th, you're right, April 9th.
It's April 2nd. So it's the first Thursday, so it's April 2nd. The next ZAG meeting is April 2nd. Anything else? Okay, so we are adjourned. Thank you.